Thank you so much, Amy. And it's so nice to have so many participants. Just to give our participants a feel for how things are going to go this afternoon, I'm going to introduce myself. Seth's going to introduce himself. And then we're just going to have a conversation back and forth about water, water opportunities, challenges, and opportunities to improve our resources. And as Amy said, if you have questions, feel free to type them in the chat box. We'll take those questions real time. And we just want this to be a free-flowing, easygoing, informative conversation. So with that, I'm going to start by introducing myself. Again, my name is Kim Du Buclet, and I'm a commissioner with the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District. And if I had to guess, I would guess that most of you have never heard of that agency or what we do. So just in a nutshell, I say the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District is the most important agency that no one knows about. Explain why. You use it multiple times a day. So when you go to the bathroom, when you flush the toilet, or when you take a shower, or when you run your dishwasher, or you run your washing machine, all the water that leaves your house goes down the drain, goes down the toilet, has to go someplace. And that's the role of my agency. We collect all that wastewater and all the storm water that's in the sewers, and we clean it, and we make it so that it's no longer a health hazard. And we make sure that it does not enter our fresh water supply, which happens to be Lake Michigan. And the way I like to describe it is if you think about a kitchen sink, there's a faucet where the water comes in, and that's, for most people, that's the Chicago Water Department. And then there's a drain where the water leaves your house, and that would be us, Metropolitan Water Reclamation District. So we are a countywide agency. We manage the wastewater and the stormwater for all of Cook County, which, by the way, happens to be the second largest county in the United States. And another quick fun fact, in protecting our resources, the Great Lakes happens to supply 70% of the United States fresh water supply. So it's a very important and very valuable resource that we take a huge part in preserving and making sure that it stays safe for all of us. So that's kind of what I do in a nutshell. I'm an elected official for the County of Cook, which has over 5 million residents. There are 9 commissioners, and we try and ensure our water safety. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Seth. And then Seth, after you introduce yourself, I'm going to start the dialogue.
Great, thank you. Can you all hear me? Can you hear me? Yes?
Yes, that's fine.
Great, wonderful. Hi, I'm Seth Siegel. I'm delighted to be here. I've spoken live at University of Chicago. I've spoken at over 50 US colleges and universities, and over 500 venues around the world. My life really changed a few years ago when I'll just tell you a little bit of my bio. I was a lawyer, then I had a business idea. I was a businessman, and the business grew to be very, very fortunate. The business grew to be a global company. At a fairly young age, I sold that business, and no, it wasn't Bitcoin. It wasn't crypto. And I sold the business and went ahead and decided to spend the rest of my life in some sort of public service without, unlike Kim, who ran for office, I never had the guts to be rejected, so I never ran for office. But I did a variety of different things, and one of which got me into the world of water. Not water purity at first, but water scarcity. And understanding that this is quite a number of years ago, understanding that we were going into a drier period where water resources were going to become more scarce, I became concerned about the fact that our public officials were not doing enough to prepare both America and the world for time when we're going to have much less water. Now, obviously, in Chicago, being on Lake Michigan, that's not really a concern, but it is very much a concern for over 40 million of our fellow Americans in the Southwest, and increasingly other parts of America, and very much so around the world, where it'll affect national security, food prices, global security, and how the world will organize itself. Plus, we face the possibility of very large refugee flows around the world. So I wrote a book based upon the research I did called Let There Be Water. It was a deep examination of what Israel did, and Israel is in the driest region in the world. It has the fastest growing population in the world, and it has a very dynamic economy, which usually those three are a prescription for disaster in terms of water. But to the contrary, what I learned and what I shared with my readers in Let There Be Water is Israel is a water superpower. It has abundant amount of water for its own people. It shares greatly shares its water with the Palestinians, the Jordanians. About 60% of the household water in the West Bank comes from Israeli sources, and ever greater amounts because they keep increasing the amounts of the water used in the Kingdom of Jordan. That book led me to start thinking about a second book, a second concept, which led me into writing a book called Troubled Water, What's Wrong with What We Drink. And Kim, I may start off by not attacking you because you're a wonderful person and I revere all public servants. Well, maybe with one exception of a certain orange-haired guy. But I revere all public servants generally. But the book that I did research for called Troubled Water, What's Wrong with What We Drink, led me to understanding that the drinking water of America is not nearly as clean, safe, and healthy as we think it is. And that's for many reasons, and one of which is actually the wastewater part of it, which is what Kim talked about, is what her agency is responsible for. And then I've written a third book called Other People's Words, which is more of an inspirational book. And since these are college students, you may be interested in this. When I was a sophomore at college, I went to Cornell University. I began realizing that I was exposed to the most extraordinarily exciting ideas. And I was like, to use a phrase, I was like drinking from a fire hose. So I started copying out phrases that I really loved. And over a period of time, I discovered I had many, many, many of these. And by the time I became an old guy like I am now, I had thousands of these. And my editor at St. Martin's Press asked me if I could come up with an inspirational book that helped explain how I was inspired by these quotations. So I have a book called Other People's Words that has about 1,200 of my favorite quotations organized into about 200 categories. I do a lot of public speaking about water, and I'm currently deeply involved in the third leg of my water work, which is water and agriculture. And because of the fact that agriculture utilizes about 70% of our global water supply, fresh water supply, and some countries 95%, you really can't think about water scarcity and water quality without thinking about agricultural water. That'll be the topic of my next book. And I'm also the chief sustainability officer very recently. I wasn't looking for a job, but I just love this technology. I recently became the chief sustainability officer, not so recently, 2 years ago, of a company called N-Drip, like new N-Drip, which is a magical solution to the world's most unsustainable form of irrigation called flood irrigation, which I suspect we'll talk about more during the course of the hour. So I'll stop there and leave it to you to ask me questions and maybe me to ask you questions.
That sounds fantastic. So my first question to you, Seth, and thank you for that introduction. Based on what you just told us, it appears that you have had a very unconventional yet successful career compared to most water professionals. How did you come to write this book about water? I think you touched on that a little bit in your introduction, but maybe you can expand on it a little bit more.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for noticing. I've really had a smorgasbord approach, a buffet approach I'm married to the same woman for 42 years and very happily so. But professionally, I made a decision actually when I was in college that I would only stay working in places and industries where I felt a continuing sense of delight. And although I came from a poor family and I had no real resources to lean back on, I made my first big jump when I realized that 6 years into being a lawyer that I really did not like being a lawyer. And I left the industry to start something else. As I mentioned earlier, I got very, very fortunate. It was a hard start, but it ended up turning out magically. And I've done a lot of different things. And one of the things I decided to do once I sold that company was that I was going to try to be a full-time do-gooder, but not do-gooder just to point a finger at a problem, but to figure out problems and solutions to those problems. And when I began looking at water scarcity, and again understanding, as I said earlier, that there were so many problems that were coming down the pike, but so little focus by major, whether it's governments or multilateral organizations, on resolving these problems, and that I could just see this car crash evolving in slow motion. And here it is, some 12, 15 years later, I'm completely correct. The problem is getting much worse, and we are going to see grievous problems around the world very, very soon from this. So I began doing research on it, and And then one thing led to another that I just decided to put the ideas down. I swear I did not think the book would sell even 2,000 copies. The publisher published the first printing was 3,500 copies, I think, and became a New York Times bestseller, and it's now out in 24 languages. It's been a bestseller in 4 or 5 different countries, and it's really been kind of a Cinderella story in that regard. And that creates a sort of having that level of success creates a level of authority, and led me to meet all kinds of other great people in the water, not other, but other people who are great people in the water world. And from them, I learned a great deal as well. So, it's like being a student and starting a course or a major. It's very humbling to realize what you don't know, but also very exciting to be able to share what you do know.
So tell me a little bit, and I'll just share this for a moment. I grew up on the south side of Chicago, where it flooded nearly every time it rained because of poor infrastructure, because of the construction of our house, because our water systems, weren't designed to absorb that much water, and to still have that problem today. So that was kind of my first introduction to water and water issues. And I also used to, as a child, I grew up close to Hyde Park, which is right off of Lake Michigan, and I would swim in the lake quite a bit. And I would hear comments from some of my classmates like, "Oh my goodness, you're swimming in the lake, your skin's gonna fall off." Because at the time, that was the perception of our lake, which I believe is actually fairly clean, even before the water department takes it and does what they do to it. So tell me a little bit, and I say all that to say, tell me a little bit about your upbringing, how that might have affected or informed some of your decisions and career choices today.
Well, my upbringing was a lower middle class, New York City. I grew up in a Black Jewish neighborhood in Queens, New York, not very far from LaGuardia Airport. I was at the time I didn't know what it meant, but I was a fairly talented academic performer. I graduated high school. I started Cornell at 16.
Wow.
I didn't realize what a terrible mistake it was because part of college, of course, is the social world, and I was 3 years younger than my freshman roommate.
Right.
So that was a curious start to adult life, but we never thought about natural resources in any way, shape, or form. We were obtuse to it, and nowadays, when every third person has a career in sustainability studies of some kind or another, whether policy or science of it, it's really amazing because that was a non-issue. We drank tap water without a second thought. We lived in an apartment complex, and we threw our trash into the incinerator, whether it was plastics or fabrics or food particles or whatever, and it would go into the basement, and I would visit the guy, and he had a big shovel, and he would shovel it into this huge furnace, and for an hour or two every day, each of the apartment buildings in the complex would belch thick, acrid black smoke, and soot would land on stuff all over our apartment if the windows were open. And there was just no consciousness. Now, we didn't have flooding problems and stuff like that, like you had, but natural disasters were just something that was in the news. It wasn't something that was part of our lives.
Well, that we had to think about.
Yeah, so I would have to say I sleepwalked through my childhood and adolescence to the extent that any of this was ever relevant. And I don't want to pretend that I had an idyllic childhood. It was problematical for a lot of different reasons, but it was not conscious about my environment around me. I also want to add something to the 66 participants on this call, which is really rather remarkable that there was no such thing as environmental studies when I was in high school or even college. My friend Michael Miller, who ended up becoming a well-regarded film editor in Hollywood, we went to the principal of our massive high school, 5,000 students, and we asked if we could form, this is right after Earth Day, in 1970, the first Earth Day, we asked if we could form an environmental, Friends of the Environment Club. And her attitude was, sure, why not? You know, it's like no big deal one way or the other. But nobody understood what that meant even I don't think even we understood what it meant.
Mm-hmm.
So that was sort of the starting point of consciousness. There were, and as I report in my second book, Troubled Water: What's Wrong with What We Drink, there was no such thing as an academic approach to environmental studies. There were no more than 20 in the 1970s. There were no more than 20 programs in all the high schools and all the colleges in the United States.
So to that point, Seth, we have a couple of questions in the chat, but I want to ask one more question specifically related to your book, and then we all see your questions in the chat, participants, so we will definitely get to those. But let's get back on the topic of your research on water systems in the United States. How would you grade our country in terms of water quality management and infrastructure? And then in your book, The Troubled Waters, and you can put these questions together, you talk about the challenges associated with our water systems. Maybe speak to that a little bit as well.
So when you ask me to grade America's water, I think you have to ask the question is, do you mean it on a relative scale or an absolute scale?
Relative.
On a relative scale, we're an advanced we're an advanced industrial society, so there are countries who are much better. There are countries that are worse. Most are worse. But at an absolute scale, which is what I prefer for us to look at, because we tend to look at things usually on an absolute scale, not on a relative scale. We don't say, oh, our air is less polluted than the air in Yemen, or I'm not sure that it is, but I'm just saying this, and we accept a certain amount of asthma and lung disease. We say let's get rid of the pollutants and particulate matter and figure that out. And again, I'm not an expert in air pollution, but what I would say is about water pollution is that we have been fed a false narrative that our drinking water is essentially safe, and I believe that most Americans don't even believe that it is that safe. And that's why so many Americans drink bottled water. Do you know that 60-some-odd% of all bottled water consumed in the United States is consumed in people's kitchens? That means they're a step away from the faucet, and they choose to drink bottled water rather than drink faucet water because they don't trust the water that they get out of their faucet. So that we have a de facto parallel drinking water system in the United States that has been created because people don't trust our water. Do you want to know the scale of this with the second order problem of plastic? Last year, 74 billion, with a B, 74 billion plastic bottles of drinking water were sold in the United States. It's a lot of drinking water. First. Second of all is, I think, and with no disrespect, Kim, to what your agency does, I happen to know the agency, I know it's an excellent one, but it doesn't do all that it could be doing or should be doing. And I'm not saying this by way of indictment, because you're doing everything that the government asks of you to do. You completely comply with the Clean Water Act and all the things that you're supposed to do under the very important, if those of you who don't know, it was a law that was passed in 1972 during the administration of Richard Nixon. It's an important law that establishes how wastewater should be discharged in the United States. But think about this. There are about 140,000 chemicals in commerce in the United States. Now, not all of them get into our drinking water, but a lot of them do. A lot of them do. And yet the EPA, which sets the standard for what should be regulated, regulates fewer than 100 of those 140,000 chemicals. And why is the case that they regulate so few? In fact, it's about 70 that they regulate.
You're speaking about drinking water, right?
Drinking water, yes, drinking water, yes. So why is it they regulate so few chemicals? The reason is, and again, this is something that I bring out in my book, which is that although people assume that Democrats are much, much better on environmental issues than Republicans, when it comes to drinking water, there's a silent conspiracy between both Democratic mayors and Republican mayors and Republican governors and Democratic governors that they don't want to create a panic. They do not want to create higher costs because consumers see water fees and sewage fees akin to taxes, and they don't want to create a political problem for themselves. And so we have a very severe problem in the United States, which is that our sewage is treated to the level of purity that is demanded of an old law, 1972, with a couple of amendments, but nothing that's that relevant, that does not regulate or control out all of the contaminants that we know are in our water. And therefore, we are in a situation today again, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, Kim, because I don't want to be an obnoxious guest here, but anywhere in America, whether it's Lake Michigan or wherever, the cities then discharge their water into the nearest body of water. Now, it could be the Atlantic or the Pacific if it's East Coast or West Coast, but more commonly it's into a lake or to a river. And then what happens is pharmaceutical residues and other chemicals that are being discharged are not treated, are not purified out of our water, and they come back at us. And that's the problem with our drinking water in America. So you are doing everything 100% legally. You're getting no citations. You get a gold star for being the EPA wastewater treatment facility of the year. And still the people who are drinking the water in your community are not necessarily getting the cleanest, freshest, healthiest water possible. And there's two, if I can just go on for 2 more seconds, there's 2 significant or 3 significant reasons this is a problem. Number one is the disaggregation of drinking water and wastewater. So that Chicago is an example of a city that disaggregates its drinking water and its wastewater. It's too complete.
In my example, the faucet, the water that comes in.
Yes, exactly. But 2 completely separate administrations and operations. And again, you're doing everything right. You're doing everything you have to do according to the law, but you're not thinking of it. You're not thinking of the water story in a holistic way. That's problem number 1. Problem number 2 is that water in America is a political issue rather than a technocratic issue. And therefore, because elected officials, mayors in particular, do not want to find themselves on the wrong side of their constituents because they want to get reelected. They permit the water system to deteriorate. That's why we have very leaky water mains in America. We lose about 1/3 or more of our water underground. In the Chicago area, by the way, it goes as much as 45% in the north suburbs. We have a situation where the most up-to-date technologies are not being adopted, where it's hard to retain elite staff in both water, wastewater, and drinking water facilities, particularly drinking water. And it is a very big problem because prices are too low, because mayors are afraid to raise prices. And the third problem we have, and I think this is going to shock everybody. I love doing this. So this was a live, if I was in front of an audience, I'd play this little parlor game, which I love doing, which I say to people, okay, we have 48 states in the lower United States. Forget about Alaska and Hawaii for a moment. And some of the states are very large, like California or Texas and Florida, and some of them are very small, like Rhode Island and Delaware and Vermont. So how many would you say is a rational number of drinking water? Forget about wastewater. How many would be a rational number of drinking water utilities to have in the United States that we can govern the quality, the quantity, the training, cybersecurity, all the pieces that we need of our drinking water facilities? And since I can't do this, I wish everybody could turn on their cameras right now and their microphones and just share what they think. But generally I get from people, I don't know, 35, 45, 55, I've never had an audience where the number's gone above 400. Never. And it seems to me that the right number should be somewhere around 70 to 80 to 90, something like that. But say the highest number is 400. Kim, you know what the real number is?
What's the real number?
51,535. We have 51,535 drinking water utilities in the United States. We have 16,800 wastewater treatment facilities, utilities in the United States. So we have this mass of organizations that can't possibly be administered effectively. They have to be self-administered, which gives way to all kinds of not in big cities, by the way, and certainly not you, and certainly not your group, your agency, but particularly in smaller towns in America and smaller utilities, gives way to massive violations of the Safe Drinking Water Act, massive contamination of people's drinking water, and it frequently happens in communities of color and poorer communities, but not only. It's not just Flint; it's everywhere. So that's the point I want to make.
I'm going to let Amy jump in and ask a few questions, but just so I make sure I understand your thesis, and that is that particularly with wastewater treatment, where they're cleaning the water, discharging it back into our water system based on EPA rules, with the EPA rules, in your opinion, aren't stringent enough.
That's correct.
Therefore, it's contaminating our drinking water.
That is also correct. Now, Kim, the thing is, we don't know what the effect of that contamination is. We don't know what ailments it's creating. We don't know if it's particularly grievous for fetuses or for young babies or older people or immunocompromised people or people on chemotherapy. We don't know that. But what we do know is that it can't possibly be a positive that you're having micro dosing of, or they call it a micro cocktail of pharmaceutical agents. In the Great Lakes, there was a great experiment done by a professor from Buffalo, the University of Buffalo. She got a federal grant to study fish in all 5 of the Great Lakes, and a majority of the fish had in their brains, in their muscles, in their organs, had psychiatric medications in their brains, human psychiatric medications. So, because the fact that people take it in, they pee it out, it's washed out in the shower, it goes to the wastewater, it doesn't get treated, it gets put into the Great Lakes, and then it goes into the fish.
So we need to let Amy in, but let me just respond to that. And that is, a lot of that needs to be education for our consumers to know. As when I was growing up, I was told to flush my medicine down the toilet because that's what our elders and our grandparents did. So that's a whole education process that actually we at MWRD are taking on to try and educate people that they should not flush their prescription medications down the toilet.
No, but Kim, hold on. I'm not talking about the unused medication or the change of prescription. I'm talking about, I'm not saying that you take any medications at all. I'm not speaking of you personally, but somebody on this phone call is taking Lexapro or Zoloft or something. Somebody on this phone call is taking a birth control pill. Somebody on this call is taking a medication for cholesterol. And one of some 40,000 other FDA approved pharmaceutical products. Now, for sure, that's the case. When we pee.
No, I got you.
So the amount of pills that get dumped in the toilet, by consumers who don't know how to get rid of them, that's the tiniest portion of the daily number of pills that are getting into our water system. 60% of Americans over the age of 20 take at least 1 pill a day.
Right. Amy.
Well, for me, I can tell you I have a backstock of pills, Kim. So if you can tell me where to bring them to, that would be great, because I know I'm not supposed to dump them in the bath.
Yes.
In the toilet anymore. So even that small outreach to consumers for that kind of stuff, I understand stuff that's not going to fix the world, but for me, I'm glad to hear that even those small steps are happening to make me feel like I can contribute to resolving this issue. Like you said, it's still a sliver, but it's a sliver that I know as a consumer or as an ally, a person, I cannot put myself in the toilet and use a program that's being provided by my.
By the way, Amy, I just skimmed over to the chat. I can't get over how many fabulous questions there are here. These are amazing questions.
So let me get into it.
Wait. So I just want to say something. Water is my life, and I love engaging with people about water. If for any reason we don't get to your question during this half hour that remains, I want to offer you all that I am a zealot about responding to emails. I get a lot of them every day, but within 24 hours, I respond to everyone's emails. My wife sometimes says, "Aren't you going to go to bed?" And I invite you to go to my website, www.sethmsiegel.com, SETHM like Mary, Siegel, SIEGEL.com. And you can contact me through that at any time. It doesn't have to be today. It could be next week, next month. When you're going for your first job interview and you want my opinion about a certain job at a water place, I am always available to you if you have a water question. Okay, Amy, over to you.
No, thank you. So I'm going to start with, I'm going back to the top. Michael put this question in. The median age for people in the construction trade is reaching 45 years old. Due to the combination of aging infrastructure, new EPA guidelines on lead service line removal programs, new school programs, and the recently passed infrastructure bill package, how do you foresee our realistic ability to fill employment vacancies over the next 3, 5, up to 10 years?
Yeah, so great question. That's from Michael. Thank you, Michael. In my book, Troubled Water, I talk about this manpower problem, person power, I think they call it now. It's a grievous problem. There was a sensational study by, I believe, the Brookings Institute. And if you contact me, I can give you a citation, or if you have my book, you'll just see it in the notes. It's right there. I have a whole long section on it. It's a huge problem, and in a low unemployment environment that we're in right now, it's an even bigger problem. And why is it a problem? It's a problem because salaries are too low in this area. And Kim, I believe you are underpaid. And I believe your colleagues are underpaid. And for the work that you are doing, you want to be able to get people who are prepared to not have to take a compromise and a sacrifice to do this work. And so therefore, the only way you're going to get enough people to fill these jobs is by starting to pay higher wage. Now, perhaps some of the federal funding that has come out of some of the big Biden administration funding bills will provide a little bit more capital for doing that, particularly with lead service lines. But I'm not sure that there's going to be enough of that. I also think that, given the fact that they think there's maybe as many as 10.5 million lead service lines in the United States, we're a long way, years and years away from before replacing all of those lead service lines.
I think wages is one answer, but I think the other answer is training and exposure. I think many people, particularly people of color, don't even know about this water sector and the construction and jobs that are associated with what you just said, replacing lead lines and all the other issues that were pointed out in that question. So I think we need to really get to our young people at an earlier age, let them know these opportunities are available, and that, in my opinion,
Amen. I couldn't agree more.
It's where our future is going.
Diana Lackner, I think, is next, right?
Whoever said amen, I appreciate that.
That was me. I said amen.
Okay.
Yeah, we have Diana. She asked the question. I have talked about moving water from the Great Lakes to a pipeline in California. Could this happen? Who owns the water of the Great Lakes?
Yeah, okay, so could it happen? I mean, I suppose if things get dire enough, it could happen, but it's not likely to happen. It's not likely to happen because the states that border the Great Lakes and Canada are all signatories of something called the Great Lakes Compact. And they have vowed that no water from the Great Lakes can be transferred by pipe farther than, I forget how many miles, but it's not a large number of miles. It's a very short number of miles. So that even Waukesha, Wisconsin, which is not far from Lake Michigan, even they, because they had a water scarcity problem, they couldn't get water from on a pipeline from Lake Michigan. So you would require, and not just California, the entire Southwest requires this. So what you need is, you would need a complete rethinking of our national approach to water. You would need a less localized and a more nationalized approach to water, which we don't currently have. And this leads me into, if I may, talking a little bit more about irrigation. I said I would talk about it later. The problem is not just California, but the entire Southwest, Arizona, Colorado, Nevada, New Mexico. Am I missing something? All of those states have the common problem that they use an ancient method of irrigating their crops, which eats up a vast amount of the water of their societies. So for example, Arizona, summer temperatures, 120 degrees, soil, sandy, desert-like. Flood irrigation, where you flood the field to irrigate the field, not once, not twice, but multiple times in the season. Oh, sorry. Think about this. They flood the field with Colorado River water. They waste 70% of the water to evaporation and runoff. And why do they do that? They do that because because it's the policy. And now finally, we're beginning to rethink that. And one of the tools that the Bureau of Reclamation, the Department of Interior are going to be using, and the state of Arizona and other states are going to be using, is to get rid of the 90% of the flood irrigated fields of Arizona, which is saying nearly all of the irrigation in Arizona is done with flood irrigation. With this new technology that I mentioned before of NDRIP, which converts flood irrigated fields into drip irrigated ones. But unlike drip irrigation, which is very expensive to install and which requires a lot of energy to maintain, this is a gravity-based energy system, no external energy. 100% of the energy needed comes from gravity, which is obviously always on, always sustainable. You don't need to have a windy day, you need to have a windy day to have wind, you have a sunny day to have solar. Gravity is always on. And this is the technique of the future that is going to transform the Southwest. Now, once you get rid of about half of the water you are using for flood irrigation, you'll have all the water you need for Lake Mead, for the Colorado River, for California, and you won't need to transport water from the Great Lakes. You don't need to have a civil war in the country.
Can you speak to the, I think you called it the Great Lakes contract or compact?
Compact, yeah.
Act. Is that a federal law? Is that just a local ordinance between the Great Lakes?
I believe it's amongst the Great Lakes states and Canada, but I believe it has the imprimatur of the federal government on it. Yeah.
And so that prevents, to just to make sure we understand, that prevents water from being transported from the Great Lakes to anywhere within a certain radius.
Yeah, beyond a certain radius. Now, I want to make clear to everybody, because I like to only say what I know and what I'm not sure of. I'm not sure that whether it's federal or whether it's regional. I think it's federal. I think it has the imprimatur of the federal government on it, but I'm not sure of that. But everything else I told you, I'm sure of.
So then my question is, is that a law, if needed in the future, could that be changed? Because as we both know, there is a water shortage and it's only going to become worse. Is that something, and I think that speaks to your earlier point about the politics around water. Would legislators have what it takes to change a law like that, or whatever the law is, state or regional, to allow the transport of to allow the transfer of water from the Great Lakes to other regions around the country? Because let me just say this, there's going to be something called climate migration, and you kind of touched on this.
Yeah.
Water becomes more scarce. People from other regions of the country, like Arizona, Florida, places where fresh water is in scarcity, they'll be migrating towards the Midwest and towards the Great Lakes, where there is an abundance of fresh water, and because there won't be any in those other locations.
Yeah. Meanwhile, the fastest growing metro areas in the U.S. are Phoenix and I believe Las Vegas. So when that migration is going to start, I don't know, but it hasn't started, at least as of last week. Yeah, I mean, I suppose anything can change. It's as we see with the changes of the Colorado River and the use of it for agriculture and the use of changing patterns of farmers. It's very hard to change property rights in the United States.
Hannah actually put, thank you, Hannah, for this.
But it could, yes, could it happen? It could happen. I think it's going to be very hard. I think it's going to be very hard to get that to change, and I think therefore that smart technologies elsewhere may be the better way to go.
So Hannah is saying that the Great Lakes Compact is effectively an international treaty, which would be very difficult to change. And for those of you who are in the chat, she has a link, I guess, to that to the Great Lakes Compact.
Yeah, by the way, it's international because of the Canadian piece. It's international because of the Canadian aspect of it, which makes it also harder. I mean, so that while Wisconsin and Illinois may decide to be very altruistic, not likely, but may decide to be very altruistic about the people in Arizona, the people of Canada have zero incentive to be altruistic towards the people of Arizona.
Let's get some more questions.
I think it's hard. Yep.
A couple more, one or two more questions that we have over here, and then I can maybe jump back to one of my questions.
Yeah, great. Gonna go just in order, or
yeah, let me do the desalination question. I can do that quickly. I write about I know a great deal about desalination. I've written about it.
Read the question, Seth, so everyone knows.
Okay. Michael Rappel asks the question is how feasible is it to use desalination as a solution to water scarcity? First of all, I'm generally speaking, I'm a fan of desalination. I write about it at some length. I have a whole chapter about it in Let There Be Water. Again, I'm referencing that just in case anybody who wants to learn more. These books are fairly easy to read. They require no prior technical, scientific, or engineering facility or insight. I write them for an intelligent college freshman or sophomore with no background in this area at all. Desalination is a terrific solution, high energy solution. Desalination facilities tend to be expensive to build. They are very expensive to continue to maintain. They can't possibly provide enough water to cover the needs of agriculture. Just to give you as an example, the largest desalination plant in the Western Hemisphere is in Carlsbad, California. It's among the largest in the world. It took 14 years from conception to opening. 14 years. It cost over $1 billion to build it. It costs $60 million a year to operate it. And it produces, I'll speak in technical jargon, it produces now, after 2 expansions, it produces about 55 or so million acre feet of water. And that's a lot of water. But just to give you a sense of how significant the water needs are, is we're talking about tenfold more water that the Bureau of Reclamation is trying to save currently in this year in the Lake Mead and Colorado River. So you can't possibly make up all the water you need. Now, desalination is an excellent safety valve, an excellent insurance policy for communities to use it as a drinking water source, but it can't possibly be used as an industrial source or on a broad-based basis as an agricultural source. And we do need to grow our food here in the United States. Let's see, next one. I was in Eilat, Israel. Should I read this? I was in Eilat, Israel a few years back. So desalination plants which supply fresh water from the ocean. The humidity released raised the already hot weather another 5 degrees or so. I don't believe that that's actually correct. I don't know why you would think that. Robert, if you can contact me later with any of the information you have about this. I've studied this pretty closely. I've never before heard about this raising temperature anywhere near that. And the way it works is it's all basically done underground. The way desalination works is a pipe that goes from the sea. It sucks water out. It goes into the desalination plant, which could be on the coast, or even in Israel, it's 1.5 miles inland because they want to not use up beachfront property. They purify the water, and they have a second pipe that goes out back into the waterway in a different location, and it diffuses the brine, the salty water out. It does require a fair amount of energy, but it could be solar, it could be wind-based. It's agnostic as to the energy source, and I just don't believe that it's close to 5 degrees weather transformation from this. But again, I'm always learning and very happy to learn about it. Okay, student research at University of Arizona Tucson.
Let me ask you a question, because there's lots of issues that have come up that we're trying to tackle. What solutions? Maybe we have to read your book to understand your solutions, but give us what are some of the solutions that you would suggest for some of these issues?
Well, it's like that old joke of why do you rob banks? Because that's where the money is. I suggest that we focus on a couple of places first. And this is why I like Israel as an example. Desalination is definitely a factor, but before we even get to close to desalination, if we reduce the amount of leaky pipes we have, as I said, infrastructure fixes. I mean, Singapore has about a 5% leak level. Israel has a 7% leak level. America is about a third to some places 45%. Some places in the world are as much as 65%. If you can fix your water mains and get the leaks to be fixed, you're going to have a lot more water. Let's start with that. You can also make very, very good use, Kim, of your product. In America, we mostly take our wastewater, treat it to the EPA required levels, and discharge it into a waterway. In more advanced societies, they take that water, they treat it to a very, very high level, to a drinkable level, and then they either use it for drinking water augmentation, or they use it exclusively for agriculture, because you don't have the psychological issue of yuck, I don't want to drink toilet water. So you have it for agriculture, and then you can use it safely for agriculture, and that's a vast savings of water. And then the piece that I've talked about already today, and again, in the interest of time, I don't want to belabor it, but agriculture really is the secret sauce. I mean, there's just so much water being used in agriculture. So water efficient crops, water efficient irrigation systems, and so forth are really the magical solution for that.
There's the elephant in the room that I don't necessarily want to speak too much to, because we're still trying to see what the EPA is going to do, but PFAS. Yeah. PFAS is everywhere. And we'll put PFAS in the same category as plastics. Plastics and PFAS are everywhere.
So I start troubled water with PFOA, which is one of the, PFAS is a category. Most people don't realize PFAS is a category of 6,000 chemicals that come from the same initial idea. And PFOA and PFOS are the two largest and most commonly found versions of that. For the students who don't know this, it creates all kinds of health hazards, testicular cancer, hypereclampsia for pregnant women, thyroid cancers, kidney cancer. It's a very, very,
And
it's very,
someone-
very, very bad stuff.
And let
I'm
me
sorry,
just
go
say,
ahead. Kim, go ahead.
let me jump in, Seth, because you are probably much more expert on this than I am. But PFAS is also found everywhere, not just in our drinking
Everywhere, everywhere.
cosmetics, it's in our food,
Yeah.
it's plastic packaging that we use for takeout. And so I know drinking water has been hit particularly hard with PFAS, but I try and explain to people, yes, it's bad, yes, it's horrible, but it's everywhere. And the other thing I say, particularly as it relates to water reclamation, is that, in my opinion, the problem of PFAS needs to be solved at the beginning of the food chain, which is where it's coming into the water system, not at the end of the food chain, which is what we do. We're taking all of the end results of people's waste and recycling it. So if we could catch it at the beginning, it won't even get to us, or less of it will get to us. So maybe you can speak to PFAS and plastics and some of the solutions.
Well, I agree with what you're saying, but I think I prefer generally, when it comes to water issues, generally, I prefer more of all of the above strategy than a magic bullet strategy. So I like the idea of what you're saying, but I would widen the lens on that and have more points of treatment. You know, the treatment for PFAS is actually relatively simple. Getting it out of our water supply is relatively simple. We know how to do that. Just have to do it.
You mean at our end, on the wastewater, or
on the drinking water end, on the guys who your not partners, your parallel mirror image agency,
right?
That sends the water into our homes. They could be treating the water to get rid of all the PFAS. But that goes back to what I said 20, 30 minutes ago, which is EPA creates standards that are not coherent for where we are today. You know, in 1972, when the Safe Drinking Water Act was passed, we didn't have such a pharmaceuticalized society.
Right.
I mean, the birth control pill first comes onto commerce in the mid 60s. The psychiatric medicines, none of them existed in 1972. And cholesterol medicines and diabetes, I mean, there was insulin, but there were just none of these medicines that are just so ubiquitous today. Again, students are healthier people, so maybe few of you taking pills, but if you would ask your parents or your aunts and uncles, do they take a pill? I would bet anything that at least half of them, and probably more, take at least a pill a day, which means they're peeing out a pill a day. 93% of the pill you take in, 93% of the pill you take in is discharged in your sweat, your poop, or your urine. So it either comes out in the shower, in your washing machine, or your toilet. And then it
ends up in one of our plants.
And then it ends up in one of your plants, but it isn't treated by one of your plants because the EPA doesn't demand that it be treated out. Well, that's the point.
It's my understanding, and again, you can correct me, that the EPA is trying to figure out what the standard should be.
Yes, they're trying to figure out the standard. And as I write in the book, sometimes these trying to figure out standards can go on for 20 and 30 years. And so while that's going on, a whole generation of people are getting themselves exposed to contaminants, and I think needlessly. And I would have a more aggressive standard. I would say, let's start with a more aggressive standard. Let's treat more water. And then if we discover the science proves to us that we don't need to, okay, you can lighten up on the standards. That's fine. But we're doing it the other way around. We're letting chemicals get into our commerce, getting into our waterways. And then, and then we're having this mass scientific experiment. It's on mass populations, and which is just nuts.
Well, Seth, I'm not an engineer, and
nor am I.
But you seem to know a lot more about the chemicals that can and cannot be treated. You mentioned that there is a process to remove PFAS out of the water at the beginning stage.
Yes.
Is there a way to remove pharmaceuticals from the water?
Oh, you can remove everything. Everything can be removed. You can remove radioactive material. Everything can be removed. It's just a question of desire and scale and cost. And also one other thing is, do you want to, one of the things, Kim, one of the things become, I didn't have this thought when I wrote Troubled Water. And if I were rewriting the book today, I would target it towards something else. And that is, we have the capacity to create what we'll call point source treatment. So it doesn't have to be your agency and the drinking water agency that's doing all the work. We could provide everyone's homes with highly usable, highly functional, not Brita. Brita is good, but it doesn't do nearly what it's supposed to be doing. But so that everyone has treatment in their home a distillation system that every 6 months or so, you get in the mail or somebody shows up and hands it to you, a new filter to pop into your system, and you can have enormously purer, healthier, safer drinking water. And that's the point that I'm trying to say.
So again, I'm not a scientist. That's my disclaimer. And you said you aren't either, but we do have a question here. One of the last questions that's come up. Can you comment on the relative rate at which small molecule drugs exit the human body in a bioactive form? A great many are modified by the liver prior to being excreted from the body. I think I heard you say most of what we come in comes out. I think you might have said 70%. Is
93% on average. Yeah. Yeah. So the answer is, that's Matt. Hi, Matt. The answer to the question is the pharmaceutical companies properly design pharmaceutical products to be very, very durable, right? And that's why when you pick up your pill bottle, it says expires, June 2025 or something like that. And you want that. You don't want it to be like a tomato or a strawberry where it's got a shelf life of, 3 days or a week. You don't want that. You want this to be very durable. But what happens is the same exact thing happens in nature is you take it in, some of it hits the spots where it has to hit, it does what it's supposed to do, and boom, it's back in the water supply in short order. And because it is so durable, now sometimes it gets modified by heat, sometimes it gets modified by sunshine, sometimes it gets modified by the human body, but as we know, it doesn't get modified to an inert or a mineralized state. And that's what we need. We need to convert the pharmaceutical products and the other chemicals to what's called mineralization, to bring it back to their raw form so they're completely inert and completely harmless.
So 2 more quick questions. This is a question about transporting water. I think we answered that we legally can't transport it from the Great Lakes elsewhere, but there is a comment in here about the energy cost to move water. And yes, it is very expensive to move water. And water at the Water Reclamation District is one of our highest expenses. This is an interesting question. This person currently lives in California, and he feels like California needs to focus on using its own resources instead of pulling from the Great Lakes, which we just discussed is impossible. Los Angeles' river is paved over so that all of the fresh water runs from the mountains into the ocean. He or she says, I believe environmentalists protested this to no avail. Do you have any comment on that?
Just a very generic one. And I'm watching the clock. I mean, I'm happy to keep going a bit longer, but we have 4 minutes. So I think there'll be a lot of people who, again, www.Seth M like Mary, Siegel, SIEGEL.com. And maybe Amy, you can send this out to everybody later as well.
Okay, let me put that in the chat.
Yeah, if you put,
And send it out, yeah.
Yeah.
So, in our 3 minutes or less, can you comment on the?
Yeah. So that just generically, I just want to say this is that the energy cost of water in the country, if you want to fix carbon in America, I like to say that the easiest fix we can do is to fix infrastructure and to modify how we transport water. Now, just think about this, for example, you said California. And I know I'm not exactly answering your question, but I'll answer it slightly, my own question. 17% of the annual electricity use in the state of California, 17%, a big state, a lot of air conditioners, a lot of lights, a lot of computers, a lot of refrigerators. 17% of the electricity use in the state of California every year is to transport, clean, and heat water. Mm-hmm. And then think about this. And then 20%, sometimes 30% of the water gets lost because of broken water mains. If you'd fix the infrastructure, just think about that. You would be saving almost immediately a vast amount of carbon fuel that is being used to create the electricity to transport, clean, and heat the water of California. Now, some states transport their water and their sewage with gravity, but in the case of California, they have to pump it way over these tall mountains and then back down to the Southern California. And until we have a better standard than that, you're going to continue using vast amounts of energy to do this.
I'm sure we need to close, but Seth, there is a question here that I think would be a nice one to close on, and that is, what can lay people do?
Yeah, so I believe, I write about this in Troubled Water. I believe that every one of the great transformations of water quality improvement in America came about as a result of a bottom-up, not a top-down transformation. It's when ordinary citizens began complaining. In fact, in most cases, it was moms complaining that the water quality was dangerous and they were afraid for their kids. Now, today, the solution is either to put your own expensive reverse osmosis system in your house, or just simply to buy bottled water, which has its own problems, the plastic and the contaminants from plastic and phthalates and all that. But we'll talk about that another time. But so people think they have a better solution with that. But the best solution every single time has been a bottom-up approach to transformation. And therefore, I wrote this book to be a combination of, if I may say, a Paul Revere saying that there's a problem out there and a crying out to the problem, and also a Johnny Appleseed to say there are good solutions at hand. And we need to educate ourselves. And I don't want to oversell it. You can take it out of the library. You can get a free copy. I'm not trying to sell books. By the way, I give 100% of my royalties to water-themed charities. I've never taken a penny for myself. But Troubled Water is a good starting point, but there are many other books that can educate you about the water. Educate yourself, educate one or two local officials where you come from, your home community, and get people smarter about this. My experience is that a tiny, and Kim, I'm sure this is the same with you, only a very tiny number of elected officials who are outside of the water sphere like yourself actually know very much or hardly anything about water. And it's on us to get our mayors and our city council people and so forth smart about water. And the way to start that is getting ourselves smart about water so that we can start, if not a revolution, then a serious reform. There's a lot of money out there for things that we care about. And when politicians hear that they're getting phone calls from consumers and students and voters, suddenly they pay a lot of attention.
And the only time they get attention is when things like Jackson or Flint, Michigan, or Jackson, Mississippi come up, and then.
Yeah, but even that, the problem of Flint and Jackson, and I don't mean to be insensitive about this.
What a time, but go ahead.
What's that? We're out of time, you said?
What a time, but make your quick comment.
Okay, my quick comment is that what we need to do is Jackson and Flint are obviously very important water stories, and they're also very important racial discrimination stories. But the news media reverts to the easy story about race rather than water. And that if you follow the storylines of Flint and of Jackson, it tends to be more of a race relation story, which is important, crucial. But the water piece of it becomes a subordinate piece to the larger racial issue about communities of color. And my argument is that we need, because it's not just Flint and Jackson, there's contaminated water widely. And we can get that story out there where everyone understands what their water story is. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Amy, is there something you want to say in closing?
Thank you, Kim. I want to just thank you guys both for being here. This has been an amazing conversation to follow. As a mother, I feel a little bit more empowered from the words that you said, Seth, to get myself educated and to get myself. I'm even considering, what is in this. So thank you guys so much for joining us today. Thank you to all of our alumni and friends and community members for joining us today. I will be sending out a recording of this. Fingers crossed everything works out before the end of the week. So please share with your friends, family, and everybody else. With that being said, I'll also share, Seth, your information.
Thank you.
Everybody.
And Kim, I want to thank you. That was a wonderful, robust, informed exchange. I really loved it.
No, and back, same to you. Great conversation.
All right. Well, with that, I'm going to just thank everybody. We're going to go ahead and end today's conversation. So thank you and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you.